Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Wyman. I'm joined today by John Kelly to discuss reimagining test. This is a topic that John and I often discuss in our work days. John, how do you see test being reimagined?
Thanks, Matt. If we're going to reimagine test, let's start with the most obvious question. What is test? So here's a great example of how we've traditionally defined it. Test is the process of evaluating and verifying that a software, product, or application does what it's supposed to do. Now, to expand on that a bit, why do we need test? Well, because software is complex. It's hard. No matter how diligent developers are, there's many reasons why an application might fail to do what we intended it to do. Of course, it seems especially critical to do the most complete testing just before we ship the application to production, because all the pieces have come together at that point. You might even say that all the risk is highly concentrated in that one moment before deploy. So we really need to get it right. So for example, one obvious test strategy that Sauce Labs helped invent is to use automation to ensure the highest possible coverage across all the possible scenarios, devices, operating systems, browsers, and so on. So what is your test strategy? 5 years ago, we might simply have just said Selenium. And then as we adopt mobile, Appium. Of course, there's other testing frameworks, but those are tools, they're not a strategy. Perhaps that would have been an okay answer at one point, especially when these testing frameworks were really the only available tool. So the tool was the strategy, right? When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But now we see people able to answer that question with more than a tool. And we see a range of strategies that are driven by the unique needs of each organization. Some examples, maybe the consumers of your application want more constant innovation. So you lean on manual testing because your experimental pace is so high that many of the production changes don't stick. Right? Well, that makes sense, right? You don't automate something that you think might not have a very long life. So you wait a few weeks to see whether or not that sticks, and then you automate it. Or maybe your application is really modern and it's built on microservices. So API testing needs to be tightly coupled to your UI testing. Maybe you have a really mature application with millions of users and you're trying to increase the pace of change, so speed of test execution is the ultimate metric. And do you rely on other mechanisms for validation? Are you starting to use multiple testing tools across the SDLC? We have more tools, more personas, and now we have more complex applications. We have a much higher demand for velocity. And so it's really important to think not in terms of tools, but in terms of strategy. But strategy, of course, is all about finding the right approach to the desired outcome. And a large part of all this, of course, is that every company is now a software company. We hear a lot about this. There's nothing new here. But that's what's creating pressure on quality teams. If every company is a software company, then the risk of poor quality software is exponentially higher. Driving down the highway the other day, I saw a billboard for Wells Fargo, one of the largest banks in the world. But the billboard did not advertise, lower rates or better loans or anything like that. It was just a picture of a phone with their app on it, showing some new feature. That's amazing to me. The differentiation of one bank from another is now a feature on a mobile app. So yeah, the stakes for quality have never been higher. But it's getting harder and harder to keep up with the velocity and the expectations for quality. So yes, we have new tools, we have new strategies, but even still, we keep hearing the same thing. A test is the bottleneck. It's the friction. So I wonder if it's possible that our very definition of test is part of what's holding us back. Software testing is the process of evaluating and verifying that a software product or application does what it's supposed to do. Again, seems like a good, direct, solid definition, right? But could we get more fundamental, more essential in our definition? When you look at that traditional definition closely, it actually feels self-referential, right? When we say that test is about software doing what it's supposed to do, that's just referring back to the spec. Of course, it's critical that the software does what we intended to do, but how do we know that what we intended is really the right thing? Many years ago, when it took a year or more maybe to ship an application, this was maybe the right definition of test, because it was really the only way to look at it. Product development and delivery, very linear process. You have to do your validation. And so the definition of test is really just a description of that process. But we make software very differently nowadays. And so it's possible that our definition no longer applies, right? Shouldn't we look at how we make software today and then see what definition of test should emerge from that? Also, it's interesting to me, isn't it curious how all the language around test today is negative? Bottleneck, failure, block, gate, and so on. I mean, this makes sense, I suppose, since we don't want bad software to ship. We have to stop it before it goes out. And probably we'll always include this perspective as part of test. But is it possible that there's something inherent in the way we're thinking about test that prevents us from considering how it might actually contribute and be additive to the deeper goals of the organization? If every company is a software company, and the stakes for quality are exponentially higher, and we make software very differently nowadays, how could we go back to first principles, back to what we really want to achieve, and reimagine or redefine test at its essence? Matt, how would you start to think about this question?
Yeah, it's interesting. You're just describing this situation. It's almost like an occupational hazard. Because of what we're trying to build, because of the complexity of what we're trying to build, we have a tendency to be inward facing. And when you think about it as an inward facing problem, then you get that language that you just described, and you start to build those systems that you just described. As technologists with all the complexity, it makes sense that we would do that. But if we were to shift our focus and we were to imagine, well, who are we making this for? Well, what's the purpose of what we're doing? Pretty rapidly, we'd wind up thinking about the consumer. And when we start thinking about the recipient, the consumer, then that whole phrase of every business is a software business starts to feel out of alignment. It's more of a statement of fact. Like, sure, every business now needs to do software, but the more interesting perspective is that every consumer is now a digital consumer. And from the perspective of the consumer, of course, the business has to be a software business because that's how you deliver your value. You have to create an experience for each of those consumers because that's where you're competing. More importantly, I think it also starts to shift the larger conversation around testing. And that what we're actually trying to do as test is facilitate the receipt and the experience that all of us as developers are creating. And we're trying to improve the consumer experience. And there are, I think, a lot of reasons why it makes sense for us to shift our thinking. Almost 23% of US households have ordered groceries at least once a month in 2021. Now, of course, there are larger reasons why this is the case, but that is a change that's likely not going to go away. It's likely going to increase. And grocery shopping is a pretty basic activity. And to think that now 23% of that very basic activity is now mediated with a digital experience just underscores how important every action we take is now mediated by a digital experience that goes with it. So we can't really ignore that. And all the complexity needs to be contextualized for those experiences. If we take this as a fact for all of our practices, and I really like your use of language, your focus on language. If we look at the consumer experience, then I think we start to lean into new language. And if we lean into new language, we lean into new ways of thinking. We start talking about opportunities. We talk about engagement. We talk about recovery, responsiveness. I think that these perspectives will help us recontextualize the kind of testing we're doing, where we do the test, and why we do the test. We can also start to reimagine the capabilities we're building and focus our testing in the right places. So as an example, people are impatient, inherently impatient, especially in the digital world where everything happens very quickly. So performance of your system is now as important, or maybe more important than yet another feature, right? We need to have systems that are always delivering at a pace that people expect. And if everyone's delivering digital experiences, then every company is moving that bar up a little bit every year. It turns out 1 in 5 consumers will abandon a website or an app without waiting any amount of time. So if it's slow at all, they're gone. And it's even more interesting that it turns out 7% of folks will actually throw an object in anger when they experience one of those moments, which is kind of a bizarre statistic to have discovered during the survey. When we recontextualize testing, we think about testing in terms of the actual output, the consumer, the experience, then we have an opportunity to rethink who we're delivering it for. And as our CEO, Alad Miles, talked about in his keynote, 62% of people that require accessibility experience errors every day. That's a meaningful number of people who struggle to consume digital experiences. And these are people where we can make it easier. The digital world can actually make opportunities to become to get access to information. So this is something that we can make easier, and yet we're making it harder. And it's not being caught. And the place you would catch it is with your testing. You would catch it with your visual verification. You'd test it by looking at the elements of the application, how it comes together. You would use a different type of test. So as the digital world becomes more pervasive, it starts to feel more like magic. Everything's interconnected, and they're interconnected in ways that you may not expect. You can get phone calls or Zoom chats on multiple different devices simultaneously. Your vacuum cleaners connected to your phones, connected to your laptop, shows you a map of your house. The pieces, as they fit together, are a new type of context, and people can't even describe that context. And so when people encounter issues, it turns out 18% can't even describe what the issue was that they encountered. They just know it was broken. It just wasn't right. So this puts even more emphasis on test. Test is how we uncover those moments. And test needs to exist through the entire life cycle, pre-production and production, because now anytime you get an error, you need context around that error, and that needs to feed, as a feedback loop, if you will, into your testing. You need to understand that experience and ensure that you're protecting, that you're focused on the outcome, that won't happen again, and that you understand the other errors that are related to it. So now test has expanded, and the responsibility of test has expanded. And this is critical because the digital world is expanding. In 2022, it's estimated there will be 15 billion mobile devices that are active on the planet. That's multiple times the number of people. The digital world isn't slowing down. It's making all of these pressures larger and more significant. And so I think rethinking test, reorienting ourselves with test, not towards the internal complexities, not towards the internal systems, but rather to the consumer experience, to what people are actually finding, is critical in our next stage. It's also important to understand that this has always been at the root of QA. Right? QA has always put the user first. We've had test plans, we've had steps to reproduce, we've had user actions and scenarios. These are all human-centric, people-centric activities. However, we haven't been able to create the same kind of leverage, and we haven't been able to take that kind of thinking through the entire software practice because of the difficulty of building the systems itself. But now that people are competing, now that we're all businesses competing in that larger digital world, we have to take that knowledge that we've gained and that thinking we've gained, and we need to help spread it across the entire software development lifecycle. I think this is the moment where we're on the cusp of a new way of thinking. We're on the cusp of sort of an era of the digital experience. And I think test is the way in which we can actually glue together an understanding of that digital experience. And the perspective of test, especially as it permeates into the broader set of development practices through shift left and shift right, through DevOps, through all these different people now who are better situated to connect directly to the end outcome, which is the customer experience. Test acts as that glue. It brings together what we're building, why we're building it, and then how it's received. So test in the digital era is how we put the consumer first. So John, if we take that as a new perspective, then how would you define test for this new digital era?
Well, Matt, I think you've already said it, right? When you expand the sense of test across the entire SDLC, because we're getting more deeply focused on the consumer experience, because we can now with the way we develop software, then the definition of test has to expand. It has to be more essential, more fundamental, not be so inward looking, not be so self-referential. It needs to be focused on the user. And so we would say, I think, that something along the lines of software testing is the process of ensuring that the consumer receives the best possible experience every time. And when you take this perspective, you start to change your language. You start to talk about things like continuous, delight, speed, feedback loop. All of the old ways of talking about test are still inclusive here. So this is in addition. And I think what you get is a sense that test is no longer just this negative thing that slows us down, but it really enables us to go faster, to be continuous, to bring those user experiences quickly back to the development team and back into the product. And so test becomes additive and it contributes to the underlying goals of the entire organization. I think that's just a whole different way of thinking about test. And it's really exciting to be around while we're doing this. So, Matt, what is Sauce Labs doing to implement this new vision, this new definition of test?
Well, it's interesting. We've actually been on this journey for the last few years. On the one hand, we continue to invest heavily on all those automation capabilities that are so important to functional testing, whether that's Selenium and operating systems and devices and the different OSs that come through. And we continue to invest very heavily on performance and helping those environments be easier to get to, faster to receive, faster to use, better parallelization. So you can expect quite a lot coming over the next few weeks and months around performance and all of that core. At the same time, we, to your point, are taking this broader look at test and the practices of test, and we call it the DevOps Test Toolchain. And it's this journey that brings together all the different types of signals, that brings together all the different moments, if you will, where there's a chance to understand the consumer experience and create context around that and pull them together into a holistic view, both pre-production and post-production. And that DevOps Test Toolchain really has three primary pillars. The first one is depth. This is really understanding the context of what's happening when there's an error or when you've run some automation. And this is understanding the device vitals. This is understanding the errors that have occurred. This is seeing the network traffic. It's understanding more. And you want to understand more because you need to be able to do clean handoffs. And this is the collaboration pillar of the DevOps Test Toolchain. So collaboration is all about, frankly, not wasting time, finding ways to help people work together such that when something is discovered, we can do rapid handoffs, which allow us to either recover or allow us to address a particular issue without wasting a lot of time doing, arguing. That's always a problem, right? Arguing whether it is or isn't an issue. If you can actually show context, you can prove that it's an issue, but more importantly, that you can regress the issue very rapidly and potentially even repeat it even more easily. So collaboration back and forth across the different moments is critical. And then last but not least, especially in this world right now, acceleration. Everything has to go faster, but there are many different aspects to acceleration. Acceleration isn't just system performance. It's also about getting that context rapidly. It's about making that connection rapidly. It's about pulling the right signal in at the right time. It's also about using the right type of testing at the right moment in time. And we'll talk more about this in a few minutes, but as an example, more API testing, because API testing is fast. Functional testing, useful, but it's a bit of a hammer. If you actually want to know how the API is performing, you should use an API solution instead of a functional test solution. So these three pillars are really the primary means that we're bringing it all together under this journey of a DevOps test toolchain. So we'd like to show a few demos. And we've pre-recorded these and we've asked some of our wonderful engineers to present some of the areas that they're working on. We'll start off with a mobile demo given by Gil Megdish, who is our principal mobile architect. And Gil's going to walk through a set of new capabilities, a couple that have already released in the last few months, and some that are about to come out over this next month around device vitals, which would be CPU, memory, and UI responsiveness. This is what helps you understand when a user sees a hang, why they saw a hang. He's going to give you information about network. We have a whole new capability that lets you see the traffic back and forth. Once again, if you have an app and there's a 500 or there's some other error that happens underneath, the UI may not be very responsive to the error. But if you can look at the network traffic, you can see what actually happened, what was really transpiring between the app and the server. And that's how you decode, if you will, the consumer's experience. And then last but not least, all the way into production. So this is something you can use in production or during test, in pre-production, a connection between the error reporting and error monitoring tools and your actual mobile app. So you can actually see and walk into the specific line where the error occurred and see all the details, the stack trace, so that when you do the handoff from SDET and QA to developer, or you're a person who's doing both sides, you can get right to the root cause within moments. There isn't a lot of back and forth. You don't have to go reproduce locally. You can actually take the automation asset or the moment in production and see it all in one place. So without further ado, Gil Megdish.
Hi everybody, my name is Gil Megdish, and today I want to show you a few things we have developed here at Sauce Labs, features to help you release better apps faster. But before I dive into those, I want to show you this app of mine. You can see it's an e-commerce app. You can click on an item, look at its bag. I can change colors and add it to the cart. And then I can view my cart. And if I'm not satisfied, I can just remove the item. And what's going on? Oh, there we go. All right, let's pick another item. I'll take this awesome bike light. And then, what just happened? Where did my app go? Okay, let's dig a bit and see how the app behaved. I'm going to end the session now. Click on Test Results. And then click on the session we just recorded. This is the test results page. On the right, we have the good old video from the device. On the left, you'll notice that we have a new tab, Interactions. This is a bird's eye view of how I interacted with the UI. At the bottom, you'll notice 3 new tabs: Network, Error and Crash Reporting, and last but not least, Device Vitals. Let's start with Interactions. You can see I have some tabs. I clicked on UI Elements. This is the button I pressed when I changed the color to red. You see I have a label, view ID from the app resources, the name of the class, and an XPath. I can just copy paste this XPath into an Appium test and have it working in no time. Just by looking at the interactions, I can immediately understand what happened in this session, and I can also click and skip to the appropriate place in the video. Let's talk about the bottom bar. First, we have the Network tab. The Network tab shows me the network request my app has sent during this run. Let's click on one of those requests. Here you can see the request was to add an item. I have a request method and the response status code. Scrolling down, I have all the response headers and the request headers. You can see cookies here, custom headers such as trace ID. These requests also have a query parameter called ID. Let's take another request, one that failed. This is an endpoint for collecting analytics about my app, but you can see I got a 4 or 3 here. This is something I want my team to investigate. It could be a server-side problem. Again, I have the request method, that is a post, and the status code. The response headers are here, and the request headers too. Notice that this request also has a payload. This will help me debug the problem. The Network tab is everything you would expect from a Chromium Network Inspector. It has filters and a search bar too. Now let's move to the next tab. This is Error and Crash Reporting tab. It tells me if the app had a crash and if I logged errors. You can see I haven't logged any errors, but I do have a crash. This is why my app disappeared into thin air when I clicked on the bike light. Let's click on View Crash and see what we come up with. This is the crash debug panel. On the right, I see the call stack leading to the crash. I have the exception message, and I have the file name, line number, class name, and exception type. Looking at this, I know exactly where the problem is, and fixing it is no-brainer for my team. Alright, let's close this tab and go to the previous one. Lastly, the device vitals. We have three charts here: CPU performance, memory performance, and UI responsiveness. CPU performance tells me the percentage of compute time my app was using each second of the video. The memory performance tells me how many megabytes my app allocated. This is where I'll see memory leaks or resources not being deallocated. And UI responsiveness shows me the performance of the UI thread. Lower is better. You can see I have a peak here. This is bad. This is the reason why my app did not respond when I clicked during the use. Definitely something I need to fix before releasing to the App Store. To recap, we have seen 4 new features: interactions, network, crash reporting, and device battles. Thank you.
Well, that was a great example of depth in mobile. And as we said, our DevOps Test Toolchain is all about depth, acceleration, and collaboration. So let's look at an example of acceleration. One of the fastest types of testing is API testing. And we can now collect network traffic from the live and automated UI tests that you do on our platform to generate API tests. And you can use this to monitor your APIs, or more interestingly, you can use these tests in CI to do rapid integration testing at 10 times or more the speed of functional testing. Of course, you'll still need your functional UI tests, but with API testing in place, you can accelerate your overall testing strategy. So let's see a demo of API test generation from live and automated UI tests.
I'm here to showcase how you can generate your API tests by uploading your app to Sauce Labs real devices. Let's get started. First step, you need to upload your app. In this case, I have my Android demo app, which I'm going to upload. I have already uploaded this app before, so for the sake of this demo, we'll quickly jump in. So we'll go to settings. I have my network captured enabled over here. I'm going to choose a device now. So let's go to a particular device. Let's say we want to run it on Google Pixel 6. I'll start my tests. At this point, we will install this app on the Google Pixel 6, and we're going to create some network traffic, finally, which will help us generating these API tests. So once the app is ready, we'll jump in. Okay, here we have the app. I'm going to click on the API calls. These API calls are for the EU data center, and it's going to show us all the devices that Sauce has, particularly and similarly for the US data centers. You can see all the devices. We'll end our session and we'll go to the test results under live. Over here, we'll see the HAR files that were generated as part of the network capture. So you can see all the different HAR files that are getting generated as part of this. At this point, we'll jump into API testing. We'll create a project. Let's start from a simple catalog, call it SauceCon demo project. We will go to HTTP client and we'll say we need to import a HAR file from the RDC job that we just ran. So we'll hit import. And you see we have, at this point, the HAR files in there. We just need to create a new folder. We'll save this folder and add the files in here. Here we go. We have the 2 API calls that we generated as part of our app. Now we're going to generate the tests using these files. Here's the first test. You have the code, you have the visual. I'll publish this test. and run it. So once we go here, I have the SauceCon test. I'm going to run this test and view the results. There it is. It's super easy to get started. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. Thanks a lot for watching.
That was exciting. Not only did we see acceleration in test creation, but we also saw a very sly version of collaboration where manual and automated testers can feed their development partners with new test creation capabilities so we can actually get those tests into our SDLC more easily. Let's turn our attention now to mobile error reporting. Based on the recent acquisition of Backtrace, an error monitoring and reporting solution in the gaming space, which incidentally is a very unforgiving space to errors, we've created a new Sauce Labs mobile error reporting and monitoring tool. This is a tool that crosses over depth, collaboration, and acceleration. It brings together QA and devs to better understand all those errors and to recover more quickly. We saw a brief demo of it earlier when we were looking at mobile depth. Let's turn now to get a sneak peek from Vincent Lussenberg and his session all about mobile error reporting and how to maintain those critical app ratings.
Let's take a quick look at how Backtrace can help you drastically reduce your mean time to detection and resolution. The default overview screen gives us a high-level overview and trending of our app's health. We can see the raw number of errors along with how many users and app launches were error-free, meaning an app was demonstrating healthy behavior with no errors reported for that user or session. The release view provides even more insight into problems that may be happening in one version but not in another. In this case, we can clearly see that there's a problem with version 2.1.0, which 25% of my user base is still on. Only 60% of that version's users are error-free versus more than 90% of users for the other versions. The triage overview shows which issues are active in an app, along with their statuses. This data comes from our best-in-class deduplication algorithms, which create buckets for problems we identified as having the same root cause, identified by the attribute we call fingerprint. For aggregation, Backtrace is able to show insights across all mobile platforms. Let's take a look at a call stack, one of the most essential pieces of information that Backtrace provides. Backtrace can display an accurate call stack for managed and native errors, even if you use an obfuscation framework like ProGuard, if you provide Backtrace with a ProGuard mapping file. We're looking at a Java hang now, and we can see that all active threads are captured, and the thread that is hanging is highlighted. Backtrace can also look up the exact location in our source code repository where the problem originated. Breadcrumbs shows system events, like low memory, network collection lost, as well as user actions, like network switch, app switch, airplane mode turned on. Let's take a look at iOS. Just as with Android, we can see a human redo a call stack. For the best accuracy, upload your DSIM files to Backtrace. These will be generated after your app is built or when you publish your app to the App Store. We can see a lot of important app and device attributes, most of which are collected automatically.
Thank you for joining us as we work to reimagine test, both in this conversation and throughout SauceCon. As development processes have changed and become more focused on the user, test can and must do the same. But the good news is that we have so many more testing tools across the entire software development lifecycle, and we're connecting them together into a true DevOps Test Toolchain. So this is a really exciting time for test, as test can shift from being perceived as the bottleneck to becoming a truly additive and positive aspect of software development and delivery, for ensuring that the consumer receives the best possible experience every time. We're looking forward to many more insightful, informative, and innovative conversations over the course of the conference. And we'll now have a brief break before moving into breakout sessions. And during the break, we would also encourage everyone to stop by the Partner Pavilion to chat with some of our partners and learn how they're helping us to reimagine software development, delivery, and testing.
So from John and I, thank you again and enjoy the rest of the conference.